suppose I could wait forever for somebody to turn up on a subject of this nature. I know that Joe has been practicing a little bit of malign encouragement in pretending that he doesn't understand the concept of authority. He ought to anyway, in theory, because he is middle class and a graduate who has boasted that he has read Nietzsche more than once. But he, I'm afraid, has daddy issues, and people with daddy issues have a problem with authority. And people who have a problem with authority are not really capable of following the orders of their leader or accepting their authority. And for this reason, the group to which they belong will never be successful, because whatever leader who presents himself will not have his orders followed, and this means that he cannot lead his disobedient followers to success, because they won't accept his authority. I have said previously that no beta male will accept the authority of another beta male, and it is because beta males do not have the charisma and leadership qualities of an alpha male. But in a matriarchy, leadership qualities are not cultivated and are being actively suppressed by making males confused about their gender, and this they do. This the society does by expecting them to behave in a transgender way, to be empathetic yet be commanding and ruthless and successful, and not providing the role models required or the instructions required for the demonstration of these qualities. So the qualities of a hero that Nietzsche wrote so much about, the will to power, man and Superman, are needed to are needed for any successful accomplishment of any project, any undertaking, and this is lacked by all these men in nationalism. This is perfectly obvious when they had their chance in the 2010s, I suppose. That there was a period in which there was this perception that nationalism could be successful because it was edgy and it was being led by middle-class graduates, and that crashed and burned too. But fundamentally the problem is that these men who led nationalism lacked the leadership qualities that is required to lead any project, any undertaking to success. Now, we know who they are. Nick Griffin was leader of the BNP. He had, and during his leadership, during his time as a leader, I should say, he had middle-class graduates who would give a better impression of nationalism joining his party. People such as, Mark Collard, he was technically a graduate, Eddie Butler, people like that. But it all crashed and burned because what they lacked, all of them, was the moral integrity to acknowledge the truth. And the truth is basically the problem of matriarchy, which even now they refuse to acknowledge. They want to blame the Jews, they want to blame the Muslims, but they cannot accept that it is their thraldom to the matriarchy that prevents them from ever successfully breaking out of its grip. So what happens is the perception that they cannot challenge the matriarchy, so they will never allude to the behaviour that supports the matriarchy. As I've said before, patriarchy is a society Patriarchy is a society prioritising the preferences of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. Matriarchy is a society prioritising the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring. And we know that these men are morally compromised. They are not, with the exception of Nick Griffin, they are not married fathers. And Nick Griffin never dared to point out that this is a problem behaviour, a moral and social disease afflicting the West. Because he is fundamentally a coward. Well, he has been brave, well, up to a point he has been brave, but he's not going to go against the sacred cows of the West. And I think these men who are afraid to support the eternal and universal institution that is marriage are really too afraid of alienating their fellow nationalists. So we already know that Mark Collett and Eddie Butler are not married fathers. And Nick Griffin is already outnumbered. We already know that Britain is a society that is, as far as I am concerned, is a matriarchy, because a matriarchy is a society prioritising the preferences of unmarried parents. And this means parents won't even bother getting married, and nobody will think to question them, because they are, in fact, in the majority, according to the, what do you call it, the National Statistics Office or whatever. So we already know that more than half the parents in Britain are not married parents. And this is the problem that nobody will discuss, not even those who claim to have an interest in the racial hygiene of their nation. They just won't do it because they're too scared, right? They won't do it. And even men who are not sexually active, so they don't have the immediate, fear of losing sexual access to, a potential female sex partner. They won't do it because they're terrified of alienating their fellow nationalists who are sexually active, who are unmarried parents, who are seeking to acquire sexual access to a woman, not their wife. They are, in fact, too terrified of alienating these other men. Forget, these women who will, withdraw their approval and, call them, misogynists, Nazis, Islamophobes, racists, whatever, or whatever labelling that will do the job of lowering the status of men who dare to complain about the matriarchy. So, really, the only authority they have left is the authority above any mortal, infallible man, dead or alive. Because if you don't believe in God, the only authority you have would be dead men. You know, Moses is dead, Muhammad is dead, Jesus is dead, all the prophets of God are dead. And it is a system that requires, in fact, yes, requires belief in God or acknowledgement that this hypothetical supreme authority exists. And all these men who claim to be Jews and Muslims and Christians, they don't believe in it. They are the hypocrites. They only claim to be Jews, Christians and Muslims because they won't actually challenge the matriarchy, you know, the boys at Hizb ut-Tahrir, orthodox rabbis, ultra-orthodox rabbis. They dare not say that the social and moral disease of the West is widespread illegitimacy and the condoning of unmarried parents, to the extent that Downing Street technically accommodated two sex offenders because Boris and his girlfriend, as she then was, who was the mother, the unmarried mother of his offspring, were not married to each other. They forgot. They didn't get round to it. Nobody ever dared to call them out, certainly not the media. And these men who claim to be nationalists dare not challenge this stupendous fact, I would say. It's something to be concerned about, that your society is a matriarchy that prioritizes the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring. But because the Fourth Estate will not talk about it, it is in fact ignored. So these nationalists, so-called, continue stupidly to blame Jews and complain about Muslims because it's easier, because they all know that there are far more people who hate Jews and who want to talk about widespread illegitimacy and the degeneracy caused by condoning widespread illegitimacy, to the extent that Western leaders of Western nations, such as New Zealand and Britain, have homes for prime ministers housing what the Quran would treat as sex offenders. So that is really the problem that no one will talk about, that no nationalist man is man enough to talk about. Only I talk about it. Now, what is it to do with deriving an ought from an is? I've often had arguments with my mother about something, and it goes along the lines of, something should or shouldn't be the case, and then the other saying, but it is. I better give an example, I suppose. Okay. The easiest one is, people shouldn't steal. And the answer is, but they do, but they shouldn't, but they do, but they shouldn't, but they do. And it goes on ad nauseum, and each party thinks that they are correct in asserting their position that people shouldn't steal, but they do. But they're really arguing about different things. So they make a category error. And this is one of the most important things to understand about these discussions. So if people steal, then the problem is that, well, is that they don't think they're going to get caught, or if they get caught, they don't think they're going to be punished, or they would steal and get caught and suffer the consequences than starve, for example. So when people talk about, not deriving an ought from an is, it's a very complicated point made by David Hume. I looked up the Wikipedia entry and, to be honest, I gave up on it. But I remembered these arguments that I've had with my mother about, whether something is or isn't the case, and whether something should or shouldn't be the case. And it is a misunderstanding of the terms of the debate. Should is not is, it is not should. Now, what is this to do with secular Quranism? It's very simple. If the Abrahamic God exists and revealed the Torah to Jews and the Quran to Gentiles that contain his laws, then we should follow them, shouldn't we? I mean, obviously, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you'd say, well, I don't believe in God, therefore I shouldn't follow these laws. But then, the people who do claim to believe in the Abrahamic God, and they ought to follow these laws, or should make more of a point of saying that they will follow these laws, but they don't, you see, they don't. So they are hypocrites and cowards. Hypocrites are cowards and morally compromised. And this means, because I dare to come to the logical conclusion that believing in the Abrahamic God entails, I am, in fact, intellectually and morally superior. Yes, I am. And the people who, what excuse do they give? Have they even? No, actually they haven't really, they haven't given any valid excuse. So I've invited Orthodox rabbis to rank the 4 Gentile religions, but they're afraid. Some of them have even said, what you propose is dangerous to us. So this means that they're more afraid of their Christian overlords than they are of the God that they're supposed to believe in. And this suggests, well, this is evidence that they don't believe in God, because really what the Bible says, what the Old Testament says, is that the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. And this means that the only person, God isn't a person. You shouldn't fear any person at all. But God himself. Because, that is the logic of this belief system. So, to fear God is to fear disobedience to his laws, because of the punishment that would ensue if, for disobedience. These punishments are already detailed in Deuteronomy 28 and in the Quran too. So that would be, what Jews would fear. It's a moot question whether these punishments would apply to Gentiles, but Gentiles have been expelled from their land, sold as slaves, that sort of thing. So I don't see why these punishments listed in Deuteronomy would necessarily be escaped from by Gentiles. After all, being conquered would mean that your resources, the resources of your national territory, would be used by your conqueror. And this would include the people who would be used as a resource. And this is really what globalism is all about. You have a global empire, you move goods and people around easily and freely, and you would move people from one country, from one part of the world to another part of the world, and you wouldn't care who complained. But well-run empires like Russia or Austria at the time would, and China even now, you are technically supposed to apply for permission when you want to travel from one part of the empire to another. I don't know how this operates in Russia, but obviously, these requirements are pretty obvious. The reasoning behind them, because people would complain. Obviously, if people from the eastern end of the empire suddenly converge on the western end of the empire, and obviously you don't want to upset the locals. I know in China when there was when basically the countryside in China was denuded of its population, when anybody who was anybody would, if they could travel, they would go to the city to make money and leave the countryside to rot. And I remember a Channel 4 documentary that basically showed, it did show, there was this wedding meal, and the only people around were men, and it wasn't because there were, that some kind of sex segregation was being practiced, but the women had basically gone to the city to earn money, and the men had to stay behind and till the land or something of that nature. Because somebody had to stay behind and look after the shop if the women had gone. So I think there was some kind of error in that, and I'm sure the city folk complained bitterly about the manners and the behaviour of the country folk who didn't behave according to the more refined standards of city folk. But back to the point of this title, of the title of this stream, about deriving an ought from an is. It all depends. The ought depends on the is, whether it is true that God exists. And in a way, even this is not absolutely necessary. What is necessary is whether you do indeed believe what you claim to believe. Now, a good example of cognitive dissonance is if I say I love you, but I want to kill you. you would think, well, that's not a very loving thing to do, trying to hurt your, the person that you claim to love. So this would generate a degree of cognitive dissonance that would make you conclude that I'm lying if I say that I love you because I want to kill you. I mean, I know that there's a lot of homicide within families. But the joke about, the butler did it in books on crime detection is false, really. If you're murdered, it's you're most likely to be murdered by somebody you know, and somebody who knows you intimately, who stands to gain from your death, and that would mean whoever inherits from you. And the closest person would be your spouse. And if you have no spouse, then it would be your next of kin, which would still be a member of your family. So this is the statistical probability of being murdered by somebody who is a member of your family, who has access to you, who shares the same home as you. This is, I believe, a police or a crime statistic. So I am in this curious position of being an agnostic. Who, because I promote a theocracy, I have to prove the efficacy and utility of it. And this I do by doing the logical thing. If I say I believe in something, I would have to prove it through, words said or deeds done. And I think by doing so, I prove that I do believe that secular Quranism is the only viable solution to the problem, because it deals with all the problems I know are being suppressed, because I've been talking for nearly half an hour and there's only one viewer, one concurrent viewer. So either YouTube is suppressing me by not sending out a notification. I know Dr. Mengele was posting, he was posting nonsense on my other videos, which is a kind of his way of saying, I would like you to stream now because I miss you. But you see, if God exists, then there is really only one person. Person, is it quite right to call God a person? Probably not. Entity would be the best way of putting it. And so, I should conclude by saying that the system of theocracy that I propose is actually very, very useful indeed for working out who is telling the truth and who isn't, and making people who want to be mainstream behave properly, and I think it is extremely efficient. It's too bad that all the men, it seems, in the West are so totally morally and intellectually compromised that they can't discuss these things with me, because they know they have no argument. They know that if they were to engage with me, they would be on their way to supporting secular Quranism, and they don't want to. And even if they don't want to, they can't win any of the arguments, and that's why they refuse to engage. To the extent that even people who claim to care about the racial hygiene of their nation are actually incapable of engaging with me. They have no better idea other than to hope for the breakdown of law and order so that they can, organise insurrection that might work. And it's not going to happen successfully for them because they just don't have the moral and intellectual integrity to make it work. It's not just me that they won't talk to. They won't talk to each other because they don't have the intellectual confidence that is required to subject their idea to challenges and analysis. And so you have people who just want to continue blaming Muslims, people who want to continue blaming Jews, people who will not propose a moral system that is capable of being adopted by the majority, because what they propose is basically a wish list of what they like and what people like them would like, and which of course the people above them would utterly reject. And there are lots of people above them because they are the lowest of the low. Any new religion has to be imposed from above, because that's how it is. I mean, why would you follow the religion of low information, low status, low education people? Why would you? Because if you did, you would end up like them, and you wouldn't want that, would you? So any religion, even if it started out as the religion of slaves and women, which Christianity did start out as, had to be adopted by the Roman state. And once that nonsense was adopted, it became the religion of Europe, which became the religion of the world, because Christianity in a way did result in 3 global Christian empires. You can't separate Christianity from the West, because the West is built, the culture, its political system, whether deliberate or not, was built on a reaction against Christianity. And this is really the problem of the West. It is, in fact, just a reaction against the effects of having been traumatized by Christianity. If you think of Western man as somebody at 6s, 7s, suffering from PTSD because of the failure of its religion and political system, you would get a better idea of Western man than any other representation. They're not in their right mind. They're not able to look at truth in the face without turning away and blaming it on the Jew or the Muslim. I mean, who are the thought leaders of nationalism? Who are they? What thoughts do they have? They don't have anyone. I mean, I'll be generous and list a few names for you. I mean, Joe Davis, Curtis Young, Yarvin, whatever. I mean, what do the National Justice Party do? I mean, they blame Jews again, right? They blame Jews. And when you blame Jews, you are kind of elevating them above, maybe not quite to God, but most of the people who blame Jews don't believe in God anyway. So they are elevating Jews to being the perpetrator of all the ills that they suffer from as victims, and as victims you are lower in status than the perpetrator until you get justice. And how are you going to get justice? If Jews are God's chosen people, then it's only God that will sort them out, if you really think Jews are to blame. And even if they are to blame, divine intervention is required. Or if divine intervention is not necessary, then God obviously thinks that you can solve your problems through following his rules. And if you can't do that, then I guess you don't deserve to have your problem solved. It is really as simple as that. And so, finally, before I go, I should say make one further point about deriving an ought from an is. It is really contingent, belief. Okay, following God's laws is contingent on believing that he exists. Or, if that is not quite what you believe, then it is a second order belief that following God's laws would solve your problems, even if God doesn't exist. And I am, as an agnostic, in the category of this second order belief. So the first order belief would be literal belief in God. The second order belief is that following what are believed to be God's laws will solve your problems. So I have to thank these people who have been communicating with me, whether or not they agree with these ideas that give me an opportunity to further develop my ideas. So thank you, one concurrent viewer that stayed with me from beginning to end. You must be a very important being indeed.